Welcome to today's video. My name is Anniken. I design knitting patterns. I teach knitting workshops online and in person, and I sell yarn through my website yarnaddict.co.uk. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to do a one-row buttonhole when you're working a corrugated rib. Corrugated rib is quite commonly used with stranded colorwork designs, and I used this on a design recently, and I realized when I got to the button bands I had to work out how to keep the rib correct while also working the one-row buttonhole. The one-row buttonhole is my favorite buttonhole, which I teach in my finishing techniques workshops, and everyone I've taught it to over the years, I really like the look of it and prefer it to maybe more common buttonholes, but it can be a little bit tricky to do it while also working a corrugated rib because you need to keep the rib correct. So in this video I'm going to show you how. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. So I've already worked a few rows of rib. You may not want to work this many rows of rib before you do the one-row buttonhole. That's up to you, or whatever the pattern says, but I did a few extra rows just to make it easier to actually work from this sample. I'm actually going to do the buttonhole on the right side. I find that I usually work the buttonholes on the wrong side because buttonholes are usually worked on the right front for women, and I prefer to start the buttonhole row from the top, so sort of from the neck edge, because I just find that easier to work out the placement of the buttonholes and things like that. But it doesn't matter whether you do it on the right side or a wrong side, the process is exactly the same. So I'm going to show you how to do it on the right side just because I think it's easier to see what I'm doing. But in most of my patterns you would actually be working the buttonhole on the wrong side, but the process is exactly the same whether it's a right side row or a wrong side row. So let's just work a few stitches first. So I've just knitted the first and the last two stitches in garter stitch on this particular sample, and then I'm going to knit the first two in garter stitch, and then I'm going to do one pink in knit, one purl in grey. So the pink yarn is my knit stitches, the grey yarn is my purl stitches. I work continental style. It doesn't matter if you do continental style or English style, the process is the same. So I have worked my 4 stitches. I'm going to slip the next stitch purlwise. Then I'm going to take both working yarns between the needles to the front and just let them go. Then I'm going to slip the next stitch purlwise, lift the first stitch over the second stitch, so I cast off 1 stitch. Slip the next stitch purlwise, lift the first stitch over the second stitch, so I've cast off a second stitch. And then slip the next stitch purlwise and lift the first stitch over the second stitch. So I've now cast off 3 stitches. If you want a bigger buttonhole, then you can do cast off another stitch. You just cast off enough stitches so it's big enough for your buttons. I find if I'm working in DK yarn and I have a button that's about 2 centimeters, then I find a 3-stitch buttonhole works well. But what I suggest you do after you've completed the first buttonhole is that you actually get your button, pop it through the buttonhole to make sure it'll go through, and then you can always go back and adjust the buttonhole if you want to. So if you have a bigger button, just cast off more stitches. Just make a note of how many stitches you've cast off. So I've now got the 4 stitches on my right hand needle that I worked initially, and then I have the 3 stitches I've cast off. They obviously aren't there, so I've got a gap covering those 3 stitches, and then I have the 1 stitch that's left from my casting off. So I'm going to take that stitch and put it on my left hand needle. So I now have the 4 stitches I originally worked on my right hand needle and the rest of my stitches on the left hand needle. And I'm now going to turn my knitting. Now I'm going to cast on using the cable cast on. Now I imagine quite a few of you know how to do the cable cast on method, but you may not know the name. So to do the cable cast on method, you're going to go into the put the right needle in between the first 2 stitches on your left hand needle, and you're going to cast on in the correct color order, so that every other stitch is in every other color. So because that stitch, the first stitch on my left needle is grey, the first yarn I'm going to cast on with is going to be pink. So I put my needle in between the first and the second stitch. Some of you may be used to casting on going into the first stitch. Well, this time you want to go between the first and the second stitch. And then I'm going to use my pink yarn and wrap the yarn around the needle as if I'm knitting. Bring that through to the front, leave the original stitch on the left hand needle, and then put that new stitch on the left hand needle. Now some people just put it on like that. Some people twist the needle around and twist the stitch as they put it on. I've seen both methods used. I don't know what kind of difference it makes, because I don't normally use this cast on method apart from a couple of very limited occasions. So you can see now I have pink, grey, pink. So I'm going to go in between the first and the second stitch, and this time I'm going to use the grey yarn, and I'm going to cast on a stitch. So I wrap the yarn around my right hand needle, whether you knit English style or continental style. I'm so used to demonstrating this English style in my workshops that I automatically do it English style now. So I'll do the next one continental style. Anyway, you bring up that new loop, leave the original stitch on your left hand needle, and then you're going to put that stitch on your left hand needle, either just straight on like that, or twist the needle around and put the stitch on so that it's twisted. So we now cast on 2 stitches. If you lose track of how many stitches you've cast on, if you look at the stitches that are on your left hand needle, you can see you have your 3 of your 4 original stitches. Then there's a bit of a gap, and then I now have 3 stitches there. Well, the first stitch after the gap is part of my original stitches. So that's the first stitch I went in behind to cast on. So if I have 3 stitches after the gap, I've cast on 2. So I'm going to go in between the first and the second stitch, and you always go in between the new first and the second stitch. This time I'll do continental. So if I do continental, I do it like that, cast on or knit up a new stitch, and then leave the original stitch on your left hand needle and put the new stitch on your left hand needle as well. So I've now cast on 3 stitches. So that's my gap, then that's my original stitch, 1, 2, 3. Then I'm going to go in and cast on 1 extra stitch. So between the first and second stitch, wrap the yarn around the needle, bring up that new stitch. But before I put that on my left hand needle, do not put it straight onto your left hand needle. And then you're going to take the yarn between the needles to the front. Turn this back to the right side, the side we started on. I was knitting with the pink yarn and purling with the grey yarn. So when I carry on, I need to have the grey yarn at the front for purling. So when I go back to the side I was casting on, so which is in this case is the wrong side, I'm going to take the pink yarn between the needles to the front, and I'm going to leave the other yarn on the other side. Then I'm going to put that new stitch on the knitting needle, and then I'm going to turn my knitting back to the side where we started. So in this case, that's the right side. And then I'm going to, so you can see now, I've carried on with every other stitch on my right needle. Got 2 grey, pink, grey, pink, grey, pink, grey. And then the first stitch on my left hand needle is also a grey stitch. And I'm going to take that stitch and slip it knitwise this time. So we slip it knitwise and then lift the first stitch over the second stitch. So we're casting off 1 stitch and then just pull that working yarn tight. There we go. And that's our buttonhole done. Okay, and then you can carry on working in the rib. So now just carry on in the rib and work however many stitches the pattern tells me to, and then I do my next buttonhole. So you can see that's the original, that's the buttonhole I did. The whole buttonhole is done on 1 row. You can pop your button through and make sure the button fits. I usually find 3 or 4 stitches is big enough for most buttons that I use. And you can also see from the stitches on my needle that the knit 1, purl 1, or the 1x1 corrugated rib has continued, so it hasn't interrupted the colours of the stitches. So if you need to watch that buttonhole again before you try working your own 1 row buttonhole in corrugated rib, then do go back to the beginning and watch it again, and watch it again as many times as you need to. If you want to, before you do this on the proper cardigan, just cast on a little swatch and have a little practice before you actually do it for real. And if you have any questions, please ask below this video. You can find the links to all my social media and to sign up to my newsletter and everything else in the description below this video. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. And I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.